Hi everyone. Now we are going to discuss about the topic sulci and gyri. So before moving on to the topic proper, we can discuss about the cerebrum. And this cerebrum, it is divided into right and left hemisphere by a longitudinal cerebral fissure. This is a right and this is a left hemisphere. And this cerebrum, it has mainly three poles. That this is a frontal pole, and this one is the occipital pole, and this portion, it is the temporal pole, that is frontal, occipital and temporal pole. And these are the different lobes of cerebrum, that is this is a frontal lobe, this is a parietal lobe, this is occipital and this is a temporal lobe. This cerebrum, it has mainly three surfaces, that this is the supralateral surface. This is a superior view of the cerebrum, and this region, this is a supralateral surface. This is a supralateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere. And next one, if we cut open the each hemisphere, we will obtain the medial surface, that is a portion present medially. If we cut open this cerebral hemisphere, the portion present medially, this is a medial surface, and we also have an inferior surface. These are the three surfaces of cerebral hemisphere, that is supralateral, medial and inferior surface. So each surfaces, there are numerous grooves which is known as sulci, and in between these grooves there are elevations which is known as gyri. So let's discuss about the sulci and gyri of each surface. So first one is supralateral surface. This is a diagrammatic representation of the sulci and gyri present in the supralateral surface. In the supralateral surface, there are two important sulci. That is, first one is central sulci. This central sulci actually begins from the supromedial aspect. This is the beginning of the central sulci, and this central sulci extends downward. This is central sulcus. And the next important one is lateral sulcus. It begins actually from the inferior portion, and it turns around and it extends into the supralateral surface, and it divides into three branches, that is rami. This is a posterior rami which extends posteriorly. This is ascending rami and anterior rami, that is posterior, ascending and anterior rami, and these three ramis divides the area into three. This portion, this is a pars orbitalis, and this portion is triangular. This is a pars triangularis and this is a pars opercularis. That is this portion. This is the pars orbitalis, pars triangularis and pars opercularis. This is a different portion formed by the lateral sulcus. Then let's discuss about the sulci and gyri on each lobe. First one is frontal lobe. So in the frontal lobe, this is the central sulcus which divides this into frontal as well as the parietal lobe. And in the front, this is the precentral sulcus. And this precentral sulcus, and behind there is a postcentral sulcus. So in the front, this precentral sulcus and central sulcus, it forms an elevation which is known as precentral gyrus. In front of this precentral sulcus, there is superior frontal sulcus and inferior frontal sulcus, which forms superior, middle and inferior frontal gyrus. So these are the major sulci and gyri present in the frontal lobe. That is superior, middle and inferior frontal gyrus, then precentral gyrus, and also the areas formed by these lateral sulcus. Then coming to the parietal lobe, there is a postcentral sulcus which forms a postcentral gyrus, and behind that there is an intraparietal sulcus. It divides the parietal lobe into superior and inferior parietal lobe. We have learned about these posterior rami of the lateral sulcus. This posterior rami, as it reaches the parietal lobe, it divides this inferior parietal lobe into anterior, middle, and this is the superior temporal gyrus. It forms the posterior, that is anterior, middle and posterior portion, and this anterior portion, it is known as supramarginal gyrus, and middle portion is known as angular gyrus. And then after the intraparietal sulcus, another sulcus present in the parietal lobe is parieto-occipital sulcus, which divides the parietal and occipital lobe. And this intraparietal sulcus meets the trans-occipital sulcus. So the major sulcus present in the parietal lobe, they are post-central sulcus, then intraparietal sulcus, and there will be parieto-occipital sulcus. And the region around this parieto-occipital sulcus is arcus parieto-occipitalis. And this intraparietal sulcus divides the parietal lobe into superior and inferior parietal lobe. That's about the parietal lobe. Then coming to the occipital lobe, in the occipital lobe, there is a transoccipital sulcus, and below that there is a lateral occipital sulcus. This lateral occipital sulcus divides area into superior and inferior occipital gyrus, and it meets the lunate sulcus. This is a lunate sulcus. It separates this portion, that is these lobes, from the occipital pole. This is the occipital pole. This is a frontal, temporal, and this is the occipital pole. It separates this occipital lobe from this occipital pole. And there is also one more sulcus, that is calcarine sulcus. This is a calcarine sulcus. It is actually present in the occipital pole. So that's the important sulci and gyri present in the occipital portion. That is trans-occipital sulcus as well as lateral occipital sulcus, then lunate as well as calcarine. Then coming to the temporal portion, in the temporal lobe there is a superior temporal sulcus, inferior, which forms superior, middle and inferior temporal gyrus. And these are the important sulci and gyri present in the supralateral aspect. Now coming to the medial surface. So this is a diagrammatic representation of the medial surface. So in the medial surface, one of the important sulci present, it is the cingulate sulcus. This is a cingulate sulcus. So before moving on to that, let's discuss about the corpus callosum. This is a corpus callosum which belongs to the white matter of the cerebral hemisphere. It has a rostrum, genu, body and splenium. These are the parts of the corpus callosum. And this cingulate sulcus, it begins from the genu of near the genu of these corpus callosum, extends backward and upward. We can see the portion of the central sulcus in the medial aspect also. That is, this central sulcus, it extends backward and its projection can be seen in the medial aspect. And it forms an U-shaped area. That is, this central sulcus and these cingulate gyrus, it forms an U-shaped area. And this area, this is known as, which is marked in the red, this is known as paracentral lobule. And this paracentral lobule is divided into anterior and posterior aspect. And area in front of this paracentral lobule, this region, this is known as medial frontal gyrus. And behind, we all know about the splenium of the corpus callosum. And above the splenium, there is a suprasplenial sulcus. That is above the splenium. That is suprasplenial sulcus. And this is a calcarine sulcus. And this is a parieto-occipital sulcus. Calcarine sulcus actually begins behind the splenium and it gives a parieto-occipital sulcus. We have learned about the parieto-occipital sulcus here in the supralateral. This is the parieto-occipital sulcus. And here we can see the calcarine sulcus. Both of them turns backward. And we can see both of them in the medial aspect. This is a parietal and calcarine sulcus and they meet each other. It forms a triangular area. And this triangular area is known as cuneus. And the region between suprasplenial sulcus and the parieto-occipital sulcus is a precuneus. And the region behind, that is the region below, it is the isthmus. So the important sulci and gyri present in the medial aspect is, first one is cingulate sulci, then central sulci which forms the paracentral lobule, and in the front it is medial frontal gyrus. Then behind there is a suprasplenial sulcus, paraoccipital and calcarine sulcus. They forms three areas, that is cuneus, precuneus as well as this isthmus portion. These are the important sulci and gyri present in the medial aspect. Then coming to the inferior aspect. In the inferior aspect, this inferior aspect, it is divided into two. That is, this is the orbital portion, this is the tentorial portion. These are the two aspects of the two regions of the inferior surface. that is orbital portion as well as the tentorial portion. First one, let's discuss about the sulci and gyri of the orbital part. This is the orbital part and this is the tentorial part, and this is the inferior view. This is one half of the inferior surface. This is the inferior view. And coming to the orbital surface, in the orbital surface we can see an olfactory bulb, and this olfactory bulb, it forms a depression is known as olfactory sulcus. So if we lift this olfactory bulb, olfactory tract, this portion, we can see the olfactory sulcus, and region medially is known as gyrus recti. This is a gyrus recti, and there is also an H-shaped sulcus. This H-shaped sulcus, it is known as orbital sulcus. This forms anterior, posterior, medial and lateral. Anterior, posterior, medial, lateral, orbital gyrus. So this orbital sulcus forms anterior, posterior, medial and lateral orbital gyrus. So important sulci present in the orbital part, it is olfactory sulcus and orbital sulcus, and it forms gyrus recti and the occipital gyruses. So this is about the orbital part. Now coming to the tentorial part, that is this portion. This is the tentorial part. In the tentorial part, the two important sulcus present are occipitotemporal sulcus. This is the occipitotemporal sulcus, which forms medial and lateral occipitotemporal gyrus, and also collateral sulcus. This is a picture of collateral sulcus, and this is the occipitotemporal sulcus, and this one is a collateral sulcus. And in the temporal lobe, there will be this region, the temporal lobe, this portion is a rhinal sulcus. This is the collateral sulcus, and the temporal portion, there will be this hook shaped. This is the rhinal sulcus, and this region, which is a hook-like, which has a hook-like appearance, this region, it is known as uncus, and the region medial to this collateral sulcus, it is known as parahippocampal gyrus. So we obtain two regions in the tentorial aspect, that is, this one is the uncus and this is a parahippocampal gyrus. And this parahippocampal gyrus, it continues with the isthmus. So this is the important areas present in the inferior aspect. So in the tentorial aspect, there are two major sulcus, that is occipitotemporal sulcus as well as a collateral sulcus, and on the temporal lobe there is also a rhinal sulcus which forms uncus, and medial to the collateral sulcus there is parahippocampal gyrus, and this occipitotemporal sulcus, it forms occipitotemporal gyrus both lateral as well as medial. That's about the different sulcus and gyrus present in the supralateral, medial and inferior aspect. So this is a supralateral surface. This one is a central, then precentral, postcentral sulcus, and this one is the superior as well as the inferior frontal sulcus, and this is the lateral sulcus forming posterior rami, ascending rami as well as the anterior rami, and this one is a superior as well as the inferior temporal temporal sulcus, and here we can see the intraparietal sulcus, which divides this into superior and inferior parietal lobe, and here there will be an lateral parietal sulcus as well as the transverse occipital sulcus, lateral occipital sulcus and the transverse occipital sulcus, and this is about the supralateral, and this is a picture of medial surface which forms cingulate sulcus, then calcarine parieto-occipital sulcus, and it forms the cuneus, precuneus, and region below is the isthmus, and this portion is the central sulcus, and this region, this U-shaped region, this region is a paracentral lobule, and this is the medial frontal gyrus, and this is a corpus callosum. And one more, the region below the cingulate gyrus, this is the cingulate sulcus, is the cingulate gyrus. Then coming to the inferior surface is orbital as well as tentorial part, and we have learned about the different sulci and gyri of the inferior sulcus also. So that's about the sulci and gyri of the cerebral hemisphere. Thank you.